currently at a small state college in rural Nebraska called the University of Nebraska at Kearney. But I'm from the Mid-Atlantic region of the US, grew up in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and DC. And I, other than this current job, have all of my teaching experience from Pennsylvania, which is my adult home state. I've also done a little bit of translation work. And when I'm not doing teaching and things related to that, I like to travel. I like to try new food, like new drinks. I like to try new drinks. And I also like a bunch of different things in the arts. And I especially like everything related to cities, which is kind of ironic when I'm working at a rural regional college, but there's a very bad job market in my field. So we're going to start with some discussion questions. So I don't want to insult you by reading all this to you, but here are the discussion questions I have planned. There's few of us right now that it's probably not worth using breakout rooms. So I just want to hear your responses to these questions. Okay? So first, let's talk about input. What is input? Not like when you're plugging something into your TV, but input in language learning. This is not a lecture, this is a discussion. We need participation or this isn't going to work.
I think we can just unmute. Jessica
Yes,
is
go ahead, please do.
Um, I think input is just like from listening and also some reading, and also but also need to make sure the input is comprehensible. It could be image or your gesture or your action or something like that.
So input is language that comes from reading or listening, right? And you said, Jessica, that it should be comprehensible. Why does it have to be comprehensible?
Because as more as it's comprehensive input and the students will understand what you are talking about, and then they understand the words or phrases in the context. And so in the future, that will be helpful for them. And when they are doing output, which is speaking and writing.
So you're saying that students have to understand what we're saying or what they're reading so that they can take in that language and use it when they produce. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. I would agree with that. I personally don't subscribe to the comprehensible input method. Maybe it's just because I see it so much. I think it's not always done in the best possible way. Though I do agree that even if we don't use official comprehensible input, students do need to understand what they read and what we say for the reasons you give. So I think we've defined input. How did you guys teachers provide input when you were learning a second foreign or world language?
Way back in my day, I don't think they did. They just said numbers 1 through 10, repeat. Colors, repeat.
Well, that
One,
is input. It's the question
well,
of the
it is
quality of the
input,
input.
but it was just, we were just parrots. I don't think we actually acted upon it in any shape or form.
Huh. So they just made you listen and repeat.
Yeah, but I'm a lot older than you are, so that's way back in the day.
You are not old. You are, I think, 28, if I remember
There
right.
you go. There we go. Thank you.
And I'm 24, so it's not that big of a difference.
I mean, that's I started in elementary school and that's all that
Me
was.
too.
Got to high school, it was just the resources, but we didn't really the input, he was just inputting, we weren't outputting. And that was French. And unfortunately, that
Good
was
choice.
why I stopped studying French.
Ooh. And what were these resources that the teacher gave you?
Just the textbook, period.
And was the textbook full of grammar, or did the textbook have like authentic text in it? What was it?
No, but I mean, I'm talking way back in the day. That's you know, what years were that? That was probably in the early 70s. Not
Impossible.
my age, but yes. Or the late 70s, yeah, mid 70s, I guess would be.
Impossible. But either way, you had really old books. Even
Yeah.
if it weren't a long time ago, you had really old books that focused on grammar.
Correct, and no culture and nothing. I mean, totally different way of teaching than what we are proposing nowadays.
That stuff is more alive and well than you might think. I definitely hear teachers talk about it, and I definitely hear kids come to college talking about teachers who taught like that. And this is teachers of all ages who sometimes teach like this. Because even if you're taught to do something else in your methods classes, when you go to college to become a teacher, you have all this input of the time you spent sitting in classes that is oftentimes a lot more powerful than the 1 semester, 2 semesters of methods classes that you find yourself reverting to what you saw your teachers do, even if it's not the best possible process. I know I did. I look back at my first year, two, maybe three of teaching, and I'm like, ugh, I really did that. I mean, it's not like I was committing any crimes or doing anything horrendous, but I was not teaching communicatively. I was not teaching in any way as I do now. And not to say I'm a good teacher now, but I'm definitely a little bit better than I was then. So anyway, Gwen's teachers provided input. They did, but in the form of word list to parrot, to memorize, and a bunch of grammar. Not authentic text, not communicatively used language.
Correct.
Did anyone else's teachers provide input like that? Or if not, did they provide it in a very different way? I'm sure you've all taken at least one second or foreign language.
Oh, there are answers in the chat.
I can't see that in the screen share. Let's see. By songs or movies or articles. That sounds great. That sounds like authentic materials that show language in context. That is so much better than word list. What about the rest of you? I would prefer you speak it since I don't see the chat, but you can write it in the chat if you're in a place that you can't speak.
Yeah, my experience is like it's kind of input, but it's a weird one. I mean, my teachers did whatever Gwen has described, but also my English teachers would ask us to recite the whole book.
Ooh,
Oh
yeah.
my God.
You know, like other students can do like lesson, like unit 1, unit 2, but I'm the they can do it with their group leaders, but the group leaders come to me and I do the group leaders, so the recite to me. And the teacher does not have enough time, so for me, it's the whole book one time.
Ooh,
Oh
you
my
have
So
to
I
cite a
remember that.
book. Yuck.
So that kind of input.
I mean, I can see the potential value of it. You're probably picking up some vocabulary. You're probably picking up some pronunciation because you have to recite it. Though something tells me you're not really picking up communicative skills. You're not learning to understand or interact with people.
But I did pick like sense of English sounds pronunciation because I have to do like 28 units.
Oh my
You know,
gosh.
it's
So you
like,
did get something good out of it, even if it weren't
but
conversational skills.
it was the most boring thing I've ever done.
It sounds pretty awful. It really does. And I've done some pretty boring things, like faculty senate meetings and educational policy meetings. But yeah. So has anyone had input provided to them in a very different way than any of these that have been mentioned? Could be good, bad, or neutral. No? Okay. So let's assume that you're all language teachers. World, modern, foreign, second, whatever word you prefer, language teachers. How do you provide input to your students?
But using a variety of resources, authentic resources, in print, listening, speaking. I try to bring in guest speakers and having them interact with the text or the resource, because there are many different ways. And then myself being included as a resource, because Spanish is second nature to me, so I try to use it all the time. And I'm just spontaneous, so they'll like look at me and like, what's that mean? And then a little acting for them to understand, like an 8 o'clock class, and they come with their shirt tucking out, their hair uncombed, and I can use the word in Spanish, and they're like, when did we learn that? And I
And
start
you
acting
probably didn't
out, and I say,
until now.
you just learned it. Yeah. So I think there's lots of ways. I could be very wrong, but I think there are many different ways to provide that input for our students, and when more authentic and diverse resources, I think, is better.
Of course, there's many possible ways, and having a variety of ways can really be good, because they say that in order to learn vocabulary, you have to see it about 13 times in context, ideally in different contexts. So if we're providing varied forms of input, but all somehow meaningful, that's great, and probably even necessary. So how do other people provide input to their students? I use a lot of visual images instead of words in English, but I explain it in the target language. I think that's great. I am not a big fan of translation, unless it's translation class that you're specifically learning that, because translating things from the target language into a fluent language or the other way around, uh, uh, that kind of puts extra steps into the process that aren't really necessary, and it doesn't allow you to use the language as automatically as you might hope. So yeah, I think it's a lot better to present vocabulary through pictures than through some sort of translation. Okay, great strategy. Does anyone else have strategies for presenting input, for providing input? TPRS, okay, that's definitely a strategy. Is it authentic? Definitely not, because it's specifically written for language learners. But does it show vocabulary and structures in context? Absolutely, it does. And it's a great strategy, especially at lower levels like A1, A2, or novice, as people in the US who use the ACTFL system call it. Any other strategies for providing input? I guess we've probably covered most of the big ways that people can provide input, though I'm sure there's others out there. So let's move to the other side, output. What is output?
The language that the learner produces.
The language that the learner produces. So is that spoken language, written language, or both?
I think it's both.
You think it's both? Does everyone agree? I agree. Input is the language you hear or you read. Output is the language you speak or you write.
老师都说我这个拖得更老。
是啊，继续好吗？
Ah,
Learners are able to understand spoken or written and able to present it. I'm not sure I know what you mean by able to present it, but what I'm getting is that when learners output, they produce language? Or wait, I think you're talking about input. You're talking about input if you're saying understanding. Input is receiving language, output is producing language, putting language out there. So when you were learning a second world, foreign, whatever word you like, or they used at the time, language, how did your teachers encourage output? Did they encourage output? Maybe that's a better question.
When I was initially learning French and then when I started with Spanish, it was, I mean, the only output was responding to comprehension questions, but there wasn't any type of interaction until I went to Spain. And when I was studying there, it was very different, because then I was studying for a proficiency test for the Delhi exam, and that is all proficiency based and working, and you're participating in class. It was a whole different. But when I was actually in a traditional classroom, very rarely, unless it was just the only output, it was not spoken unless repeating, which was just being a parrot, and the output was just responding to comprehension questions or verb conjugation, filling in the gap. Mine was very traditional.
Well, all that is certainly output. The question is how meaningful or how communicative it is, and I think
That
it's
would be
not at
zero.
all.
Yeah, because then I went to Spain in my last year of college, and that was just disastrous. I couldn't do with anything with anything I had learned.
I bet.
So, you know, yeah, I'm very grateful for my long time there, because that's how I really learned to be the person I am today and how to learn a language. It's
What's the long time? How long did you spend there?
35 years.
35 years in Spain.
Yes.
Wow. That will help someone learn a language, that's for sure.
Yeah. And then if you marry a Spaniard, that helps too.
That gives you a lot of input, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So yes, maximizing input by moving to the target language country and marrying someone from the target language country. That absolutely will work, I hear. So, did anyone have output encouraged in a similar way that wasn't very communicative? If not, did anyone have output encouraged in a very different way that was communicative when you were a student? You do a role play. That could be communicative or not, depending on how you set it up. If it's a pre-written or a memorized script, not so communicative, but maybe better than learning word list. But if it's a role play where you give people a role to play, I shouldn't reuse the words, but you give them a character or a position, and they have to mostly spontaneously or with just a little bit of planning time come up with what to say, then it's a really good activity. So when it's pre-written, memorized dialogues, I'm not gonna say it's awful, but I don't think I would make that a go-to since it doesn't help you make language spontaneously. Students write scripts. Okay, thank you for your honesty. I can see value to it, though I'm not sure that that should be our only strategy. Because as I said, it doesn't encourage spontaneous language production. And you need spontaneous language production when you travel to a target language community because guess what? Those people haven't seen the script. They haven't memorized the script. You have to have ideas of how you're going to figure things out when there's no script. how do other people encourage output as or excuse me, I forgot which question I meant. But yes, how do you as teachers encourage output from your students?
My students really enjoy information gap activities, so they have to figure out a puzzle, or they have to figure out, come together to solve some kind of problem.
Ah, so they're information gap activities where they're actually trying to find out something, where there's a purpose for finding the language, for using the language, where they're not just finding a random word or something like that. Because I've seen those information gap activities too. They're in a lot of textbooks and a lot of activity kits that come with textbooks, and they say, oh, they're information gap activities. Yeah, but no, because you're trying to find out like a canned response with no reason other than just getting the answer. But if it's solving a problem, then it's great. Then it's a great activity. It's like a conversation. And Gwen was going to say something. How do
Well,
you
yeah, I didn't want
encourage
to
output?
monopolize. I think I do a lot on that just because of my own personal language journey. So I have just from like greetings, like part of the culture, you greet when you walk into a room. So just from day one, they're doing that. Daily conversation, I have them up, I give them a topic and they have to just use, it's appropriate, the topic to what we're studying. And then they just have free, risk-free conversation. So they're talking with each other and, depending on the level, they'll have like a chat mat to use to
What's that?
guide them along. Pardon me?
What's a chat mat?
A chat mat. So on a piece of paper, I have like, for example, right now I'm doing healthcare. So the common illnesses and accidents. And so I'll divide it up like, how do you feel? So there's different, depending, I have it the same, basically the same chat mat, but it's varies a little bit according to the level. But I'd have like, how do you feel? And like emoji faces to remind them of how
Oh,
to
okay.
respond. I'll have symptoms, like a cough or congestion, and there'll also be an image there. So I'll use the word and an image. I don't use any English. I'm not a fan
Right.
either of translating. And then they have conversation starters on that. But a lot of it's just a reminder of the vocabulary so that they can have that conversation. I did it the same with free time activities when you're talking about free time or what did you do on the weekend. So I have a variety of chat mats that I've made up to help them along so they have a resource, because as much as we'd like to think that all our students are learning everything that we're teaching them, they don't have it right there. But with that, and then lots of role play. I also try to invite guest speakers so they're with them, and then I use it throughout the building, so then it becomes as spontaneous as well. So maybe I coincide with students in the lunchroom and I'll just start talking to them and they have to respond. And I don't know, I just feel like a lot singing, singing.
So anytime they see Miss Fisher, they have to speak to her in Spanish.
Correct.
Good.
Yes.
I
I
do. I
don't
have seen
want them to
Chapman.
think it's Spanish is only within the four walls of the classroom.
It's not. It could be anywhere.
That's right.
I have seen chat mats and I have used them. I just didn't know what they were called, or at least haven't heard of it by that name. But I think it's a great resource to have like some sort of vocab or conversation guide that has words or phrases they might need and pictures. And yeah, I think the only times I can think of, aside from a translation class, that translation is good and probably necessary is when you're dealing with abstract words, like question words, like linking words, stuff like that. But anything that can have an image, like pretty much, well, I won't say any, but most nouns, verbs, adjectives, I think that you can avoid translation with that personally.
I agree with you.
A lot of teachers translate though. Teachers of all levels of experience, teachers of all ages. It's quite common.
Mhm. Yeah.
Any other strategies for providing output? Those are great strategies. I see a Nyla Teacher of the Year or Spanish Teacher of the Year if she hasn't already gotten that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think games too, you can, I do like Taboo. I don't
Ooh,
know.
great game, communicative game.
Yeah, and they love that because they're very competitive. So I just give them like a game board just with I can't think of the word in English, just with the little casillas.
Bases.
Yeah, like when they move from one spaces, when you move from one space to another, and then they have the words and they have to describe it so their partner can guess it. And I usually have them in groups of 4, so that's two teams are playing against each other on the board. And that's one, they love anything that's competitive, and second, they're using the language. They have to talk around words in order to make their partner understand what they're describing.
Absolutely. And there's research out there showing that competition, whether it's in a game or some kind of contest or competition, really motivates students to focus and to do better. Though that also sometimes brings teachers to think, oh, anything that has competition is good. And that could include things like Kahoot, like Quizlet, like Gimkit, like Blookit. And honestly, that stuff isn't so good, at least not for developing communicative skills, because it's parroting. It's just parroting in a more fun way, that there's a predetermined word or response that is expected. Are these things dangerous? Absolutely not. They can be a good little side activity to practice vocabulary, to practice grammar. But in my opinion, if our goal is to teach communicative skills, these should not be the feature attraction. It shouldn't be what your class, be it the day's class or the whole course, leads up to. It should be like a little 5-minute activity to reinforce vocab or grammar. But yes, games are fantastic when they are communicative, when students are producing real language. Taboo is great. And think of, honestly, a lot of other party games that really can be adapted to language classrooms. Think of also like some of the games you'll see on TV. Like I'm thinking here in the US of the games that you'll see on the Jimmy Fallon show, a late night news comedy current event show, that none of these were designed to teach language, but they almost all involve language use, and they can really be adapted to language classrooms. So just go to YouTube and search Jimmy Fallon show games or something similar to that, and watch some of these videos, and you'll see games that can really be adapted to language classrooms. And I have used a lot of these in different languages and different levels, and they're almost always a hit. And they're both competitive and communicative, which in my opinion are the 2 characteristics of a good game. So what about target languages? When you were students of second foreign world, modern language, whatever word was used at the time, how much target language did your teachers use? The target language is the language you're learning, not your fluent language or native language. That might be a fluent language now. How much did your teachers speak to you or give you things to read in the language you were learning?
Very little.
Thank you for your honesty. Same for my language classes back in elementary school. Was it similar for others that your teachers didn't use the language you were learning very often? That they presented or explained stuff instead in whatever language you and your teacher both spoke fluently? Did everyone's teachers provide very little target language use? It's giving yes. So that means you had very little input that led to very little language out there for you to take in and maybe turn into output. Uh-oh, it wasn't your fault. How much do you as teachers use the target language, that the language your students are learning in the classroom?
I think that's one of the reasons why, well, besides I find your presentations very useful and interesting, but I think I need to know how to do that, because my biggest problem is depending on the level. So I have a couple of regular twos and I have the honors. So in the honors, I use a lot of Spanish, and I even have students say, next year in honors 3, are they going to speak as much as you do? Because nobody speaks as much as you do, which I appreciate the comment. But yet
I'm flattered.
in my regular twos, if I speak too much Spanish, they go and they complain to their guidance counselors
Oh my
that
God.
they're in America and they shouldn't be speaking as much Spanish.
Ooh, but
So
it's
the
Spanish
mindset
class.
is very different. So, how do you want us to learn if you're speaking Spanish? So, I tell them there's always someone, because mixed in, I think here in America, it's very, I had to adjust coming from Spain, but I'm finding here that very capable students, but they have a lot of AP classes or honors classes. Maybe when it comes to Spanish, they'll be mixed in with a regular group when they could really be in the honors group. So they're doing everything and they can understand, and they could be the ones that are translating for the others, but their mindset of the others are just so negative at times that I feel challenged on how to use more target language in those type of classes.
And we will absolutely talk about that today. I like to start with people's experiences to get us thinking about what's working, what's not, then present some strategies, and then talk about how those strategies work or could work for you guys. But the biggest thing that comes to my mind there is that, yeah, this is not good that we have this toxic environment created by kids who don't care or aren't understanding or whatever it might be. And I think we might need a discussion, dare I say, in English, about learning strategies, why we are using the target language, how we learn a language, so that the kids can see, oh, okay, there's logic to this, and continuing to remind them of this, and also throughout the marking period, semester, school year, whatever unit you use, assigning students some sort of participation grade, learning habits grade, whatever you want to call it, that includes categories like target language use and like attitude, potentially together, potentially separately, so that these kids who are being negative Nancy's are going to get a hit for it. Some of them won't care, and they might continue being negative Nancy's, but I tend to think that some of them will care and that they will try to do a little bit better. So I would say that aside from the other more teaching strategies that we're going to see, providing the right comprehensible input, the right opportunities to produce interesting activities, reminding students of language strategies in the US case, preferably in English, especially in those more or less basic levels, and also hitting them with learning habits or participation deductions for bad attitude and bad target languages. I do that in college too. There's kids who do the same stuff. They do, who are just there for gen ed, don't want to learn French or Italian or whatever it is. And oops. So others say that it depends on the level, how much target language you use. I agree that it often does tend to depend on the level. Yet I want to challenge you no matter how much target language you're using, unless it's 100% or very, very close, to use more. Because your students probably can deal with more target language than you're giving them if you're not already giving them 100% or close, provided that you use the right comprehensible input supported by the right resources. So I'm guessing that we've kind of indirectly answered the barriers question. So it seems like some of the barriers are student understanding, our perceived student understanding, student behavior when they act out for target language use, and also related to that, student motivation, which tends to be the cause of acting out, of non-motivated learning behavior, of off-task behavior, that when students aren't very motivated, they show it, they act out. Could be in misbehaving, could be in not doing anything, could be in having a toxic attitude, but either way, in something that doesn't aid language learning. So we will discuss some strategies. I'm not saying that these are the only strategies out there, but these are some strategies. So we already went over this, but just to review, because I'm going to mention these words. Input is the language you receive. It could be spoken or written. Output is the language you produce. Also could be spoken or written. And the target language is the language you're learning or teaching. So just as a justification for these strategies that you're going to see, this is based on the research. I can give you readings if you want it, but I try not to be technical on my slides or clutter it up with citations. So a learner must encounter a word about 13 times to remember it, but not on a word list. It must be in context, ideally in different contexts, ideally in both speaking and writing, though it doesn't necessarily have to be in speaking and writing at the same time, though it could be. And how it could be would be like videos that have target language subtitles, or when students read something and there's also a recording to go with it. And this depends somewhat on learning styles, but a lot of research and also my personal experience suggests that input is especially effective when you have written language, whether or not it's written language only, when you have written language. I know that as a learner, I don't take things in very well when I've only heard them, because I'm not an audio learner, whatever the fancy word is for people who learn by hearing. And a lot of students aren't either. So also the same logic applies to grammar forms. That yes, we can memorize verb conjugations if your language has them, or we could memorize other points of grammar, but generally speaking, for most learners, that's not going to help you actually take them in and use them naturally, automatically in context. The way that you actually take in and acquire, let's say, verb forms, sorry for those who teach languages that don't have them, is by seeing the verb forms in context or hearing them in context over and over again, and then producing them meaningfully in conversation, in writing. That's how we really acquire grammar. Though you do, I don't want to say need, but sometimes benefit from some kind of consciousness raising that draws your attention to grammar, preferably in context. So yes, grammar instruction is okay and good, especially what's in context. That was another workshop I did not too long ago. Even tiny little doses of traditional grammar drills are okay, as long as they're just a little tiny supporting activity in a broader communicative context. Okay? And yes, learners must produce language speaking or in writing in order to learn to speak or write. And they must speak and write not in a parroting way, not in regurgitating a predetermined right answer or repeating after the teacher or someone else, but actually producing real language and making meaning. And learners must practice, aka produce, frequently, regularly, in order to develop automaticity, to use language naturally, easily, normally, fluidly, without stopping too long to think of verb forms, words, whatever it might be. And ideally, honestly, necessarily, we should provide these authentic, meaningful speaking and writing opportunities in our classes. So provide meaningful input and provide meaningful speaking and writing opportunities. That's the takeaway from this slide, in my opinion. So what about the target language? That's the language we're teaching that our students are there to learn. We should provide input in the target language. It's not very useful for learning vocabulary or grammar if we're providing it in a different language. Yet that said, there are good times and even possibly necessary times to use a language the students speak better than the target language. Like when we do a little bit of, again, contextualized grammar instruction. That's okay, because honestly, grammar language isn't particularly useful language to develop in the target language. And we want the students to understand what we're doing when we're doing grammar. So it's okay. And also, it's okay to provide a little spot translation of a word that can't be illustrated or acted out or easily defined, like a word like but, but, or is, or a preposition, stuff that can't be easily illustrated, stuff like that. Okay, but we should do our best, which is probably better than we think, to maximize target language contact and use in the classroom so students have a maximum of opportunities to see the language, to hear the language, to produce it meaningfully. Okay? But we all know that sometimes it's not easy to use the target language. We have motivation problems that students don't really care to learn the language, so they get frustrated or angry when the teacher uses the target language, that they think she's making the class unnecessarily hard. These students usually don't know that much about language acquisition, but that's how they react. And sometimes, dare I say, the teacher doesn't feel very motivated to use the target language, possibly because you're dealing with a group of very unmotivated students who don't want to be there, who complain when you use the target language. It's a natural reaction. I get it. I've been that teacher before. We're probably lying to ourselves if we say that we haven't been. Also, another reason that sometimes we don't use as much target language as we could or should is perceived comprehensibility, that we believe as teachers that if we use the target language or we use it more than we currently are, the students aren't going to understand us. That might be true, but if we use, I won't say comprehensible input because I don't subscribe to the pre-written method, but if we use input they can understand, then it's okay and it's good and it's necessary to use the target language. Also, teacher training is often an issue, that teachers weren't trained to use the target language in meaningful and understandable ways in the classroom. Or maybe they were, but as I think I mentioned in the conversation at the beginning, those many years spent sitting in language classrooms as a student are often more powerful than the semester, 2 semesters of language teaching methods that teachers take, and teachers find themselves reverting back to what they've seen. And another reason, this is one of the top reasons in my experience, that we don't have much target language use, is because teachers don't make students use the target language. They let them speak another language, and not just for talking about grammar or for making language comparisons or for exceptionally difficult words or exceptionally difficult culture things, but they let their students use a language other than the target language in situations where those students could use the target language. And honestly, I think that we need to have a clear policy of target language use in our classrooms, and we need to grade their target language use, not necessarily the quality of the language output, but the frequency the students use the target language, the effort the students make to use it. And another reason, perhaps an overly obvious one, that students don't use as much target language as we would hope, is that they don't have the vocabulary or they don't have the structures. How are they going to get them? Through appropriate input. could be ideally authentic materials, accessible, interesting, authentic materials, could be comprehensible input, written or spoken text in the comprehensible input method that I don't personally subscribe to, but that a lot of teachers use. It could be chat mat, like or a conversation guide, like Gwen mentioned, that they have pictures and words or phrases that they might use in the conversation to go with the pictures. These are great ways to give learners the vocabulary. So this is probably not an exhaustive or complete list, but this is a lot of the big reasons, if not all the big reasons, that students and teachers sometimes struggle to use the target language. Can we think of any other reasons? I'm sure I missed something. Or did I get everything here of why teachers and students don't use the target language as much as we might hope? I guess maybe I got all the big ones. Okay. I'm proud of myself. I thought I would miss something. So, how can we provide input and promote output? So, already alluded to this, many teachers who teach vocabulary contextually resort to comprehensible input-based CI text and TPRS, total physical response storytelling. In case you're not in these methods, what I mean by this is a comprehensible input text is a text written very specifically for language learners at a very specific proficiency level, using a very specific set of vocabulary and very specific grammatical structures that they've either seen or that the text is trying to present. That is a comprehensible input text. And TPRS, which is not what this session is about, is an offshoot of that where you tell a story often through acting, often through gestures. Okay? And these methods are certainly better than memorizing word lists, than parroting, than memorized grammar, but they're not the best things out there. I'm not going to say don't use them at all. They can be a tool in our toolkit, especially in basic or novice level classes. But I sincerely believe that they should not be our entire method or the focus of our classes. And the reasons for that is that CI, comprehensible input text, do not show real language, because that's not the definition of comprehensible input text. They're written specifically for language learners. On the other hand, real text, written or spoken, even if they are pretty accessible, will always contain, or almost always contain, at least a couple words or a structure or two that students don't know, that they haven't previously seen. But guess what? That's real language. Students need to develop skills to focus on what they know and figure out how to either figure out if it's necessary or ignore if it's not the stuff that they don't know. And to my knowledge, comprehensible input and TPRS texts do not provide those opportunities. Also, this is probably a problem more in high school, more in college and upper level high school language classes than it is in lower level classes or for younger learners. But oftentimes, TPRS and other CI texts are not challenging enough, not intellectually challenging enough. They're not interesting. They're kind of childish or babish. And I'm sure this is not always the case. I know it's not always the case, but many don't invite cultural reflection because they don't show culture. They're just like a story that could happen anywhere in the world translated into the target language. I know it's not always the case, but it's often the case, at least based on what I've seen at conferences for language teachers and in the materials I've picked up there and other places. But on the other hand, if we use authentic materials, that is materials made by and for fluent speakers, not for language learners, we have samples of authentic language, authentic culture. So if we can find authentic materials that are appropriate to the student's cognitive level, to the student's language level, to the topic we're covering, this is pretty much the best possible input, in my opinion, that we can provide. And then if we support it with the right scaffolding, the right support strategies, even better. And we can use authentic materials if we choose the right kind, appropriate kind, even in the most basic levels. And a couple categories of those materials would be infographics, posters or announcements, shopping sites and ads, and other Google results. I have a concrete example or two of each of these so that you see what I'm talking about. Yes, we've seen these in one of my other workshops, but we're repurposing them to talk about a different aspect of them today. So here's an infographic on French people's favorite vacation activities. Notice that from an input perspective, it has vocabulary with pictures, no translation necessary. Great. And it also has a very limited amount of language. And a student at the A1 or basic or novice level could understand all or nearly all the words here. Maybe they wouldn't know one or two, but they can figure them out by context, or if they can't, there's no harm in looking up a word or two. It's a great strategy. It's a necessary strategy. And I would ask them questions that get them to interact meaningfully with the authentic material at a proficiency appropriate level. In black, I have my content questions. In blue, I have my cultural questions. So you see how I bring both into here and honestly integrate them. That if I didn't put them in blue and write the word culture, it might not be easy to see the divide between the content and the culture, which is a good thing. It's good to integrate content, communication, and culture. So I asked them about what French people do and don't like. I asked them what they do and don't like. And I also asked them for cultural comparisons between their personal preferences and what they would expect people in their community to say. And as an extension task, to make a similar infographic based, if you can, on local French speakers, and if you can't, on classmates. Here's some more infographics that also invite similar kind of questions. The most popular sports in Canada, the most popular sports in France. Notice that both have very limited amounts of language, mostly comprehensible to basic level learners, even though this is not technically comprehensible input. Notice how they have vocab words with pictures going with each vocab word so that learners can associate a picture and a word and avoid translation. Here's an announcement. This is a poster for a food truck festival, also very appropriate for a basic level language class. You see the basic content questions I ask, and I also ask a cultural question, and this one maybe lends slightly less to cultural comparisons than what you saw before. I ask them, how does this event compare to events that go on in their communities? And then as an extension, that they make another festival poster and present it to the class. Personally, instead of traditional presentations, I would probably have them present it on a website that they post on a website like Padlet, like Flipgrid. I'm sure there's many others. I'm not an ed tech expert. I'm like, I find a site that works, I stick with it, I don't bother to investigate all the possibilities. But there they would post it and they would comment on their classmates' work so that they have more input, so they have more interaction, so they have more production opportunities. And here's an example of a menu. These are screenshots from the online ordering menu of a sandwich and salad shop in Switzerland. This is a chain restaurant that exists in many, many countries. And I asked them questions of like, what items do you like and not like? Why? What would you order or not order? Why? What would be a good dish for a vegetarian, a vegan, a gluten-free person, a dairy-free person? Can add other stuff to that. And I also ask for cultural reflection. How does this menu compare to menus for the same chain in your country or in other countries? Or if they don't know anything about this chain, which they probably don't, if they're in Nebraska, I've only seen them in big cities in the US. How does this menu compare to restaurants they know in their community? Notice how, again, lots of pictures, and the pictures connect very directly to the vocab. This is a great way to see vocab in context, to provide, in my opinion, high quality input, as are ads, which aren't really that different from menus. They're kind of a type of menu. This is a screenshot of a page spread of an ad from a French big box store that's kind of like a Walmart or a Target. And I asked them questions about what's here, what they think of it, and how it compares to what they would expect to see at Walmart or Target or some other store in their community if they're in the US. And yes, notice again how there's not much language here. There's lots of pictures. We are connecting vocab to pictures to provide high quality input, and providing this sort of accessible high quality input like what you're seeing in all of these authentic materials ideally, theoretically, helps us, both teachers and students, to stay in the target language because students are understanding, students are following, and they're also receiving the vocab that they need in order to answer these questions, to do these activities. So here's another kind of ad. This is a close ad from a Target type store. Same concept, pictures and vocab. Here is a screenshot of the homepage to Amazon France. Again, pictures and vocab. And here I suggest a little gift shopping activity. I think because I made this slide around Christmas time when it was definitely shopping season. So I set up a scenario of needing to buy gifts for your family. What do you buy them? Why? And from which departments? The vocab's right here with pictures. Ideally, no translation needed. Also, hotel services. This is a screenshot from Google where it shows hotel features and pictures. I asked them questions about what services they care about, what they don't, and why, and which services are most important to you when booking a hotel and why. This wouldn't be a whole lesson. Probably none of these would be a whole lesson. This would be embedded in a lesson where they plan a trip, or that might be a unit where they plan the trip, and in a lesson where they have to choose a hotel for the trip. That maybe I divide my students in groups of about 4. Each group has to choose a possible hotel, present it to the class, justify their hotel choice, and then as a class we have to decide who made the best hotel choice and why. We have to choose a hotel for our theoretical class trip. So these are some examples, absolutely not an exhaustive list of examples of how you could provide target language input, but I have some discussion questions here for how we could provide input in these and different ways. How many of us are there? Okay, there's enough of us that we probably would benefit from breakout rooms. So before I quit the screen share and put you in breakout rooms, I am going to copy these questions into the chat. Here they are, so that you have access to them. All right. And let's say that I'm going to give you something like 5 minutes to talk about these questions in your groups. There'll be groups of about 4 plus or minus 1. Does that sound like a plan? All right, so let's see where the breakout rooms are. This room, I think, might be set up a little bit differently than mine. Do I not have the breakout rooms option? Or am I just in a bad view that I don't see it? I'm looking on the more with the 3 dots, and I don't see the breakout rooms option. Do you know why that might be, Crystal?
I
Is it?
just assign you as a co-host. I
Ah,
think
I see it now. A new icon appeared. Thank you. So I think I'm going to create 3 groups, and I'm going to give you about 4 minutes. Please discuss the questions that I put in the chat. I'm going to set a timer as soon as I hit the start here and hit open the rooms. Please accept the invitation to the breakout room you have. This activity will not work if people don't. So we're not going to have time to go through all of this. So I am just going to combine these questions into one good question and ask you guys, what are some of the good strategies that you came up with for maximizing student and teacher target language use in your classrooms? You must have come up with some.
Yes. So for me, I think like after students learning the required vocabulary and when we're designing the speaking task, ask students to practice. Because at that time we want to promote students' language production, right?
Yeah.
Through like speaking task. And so I think like using the authentic material to design the task is very important, but also we need to design the level appropriate questions and to make sure like based on the text type that they can produce, maybe we can just we need to develop and design the level appropriate questions too. And also like I found is quite interesting because like those kind of authentic material is really can be designed for different levels, right?
Absolutely.
So for example, for the novice level, actually we can design like simple questions, but however, we use the same material, but we can design different tasks for the maybe a little bit higher levels, something like that. And also, the thing that I like the most from your examples is like you are integrate the culture elements
Thank
in
you.
that too. So at the same time, like you are trying to ask students to be able to identify the culture elements and also do the culture comparison as well. And I think that part that I need to work on more.
I mean, I don't know if you teach Chinese. I know that a lot of people who come to these sessions do because they're advertised in Chinese teaching groups. It's probably the same way with Chinese, but a lot of times authentic materials just have the culture integrated so well that they just provide opportunities there, begging for you to do something with the culture. And I purposely presented specific authentic materials and categories of authentic materials that are accessible to basic level students, yes, but that can also be used for intermediate or advanced students, that you give them more interesting questions, more interesting tasks, or even these questions would still work for higher level students, but you would still have a higher level discussion. You would have different output that would produce more language, better quality language than a basic level student. So yes, authentic materials to provide your input, to provide your vocabulary, to provide an example of a task that you're going to do later, accompanied by level appropriate task, level appropriate questions. I think those are great strategies. Any other strategies that came up in your discussions?
Like you used, you showed us the slide with Carrefour, and we
Yeah,
also have that in Spain, or
I know.
El Corte Inglés, which is a popular department store.
Likewise.
And so instead of giving it to them on an infograph, I have them log on to it. And so to scaffold it a little bit, depending on the level, I might like use one of the vocabulary words, and they have to look through and be able to identify like the department where they would find it. So they're real just one word. And then I might start say like, depending on the level, maybe describe an event or something I need, and then they have to look for the appliance, the clothing, or whatever it is. And then as they get more advanced, maybe you're looking for a gift and give them a situation. But I think that's proven to help a lot because it kind of guides them through them. And then you get to the cultural aspect with how does this compare to a store, like you said before, Carrefour to Walmart or something, in your own culture. And then so you can still get the cultural aspect there. It's just instead of using the infograph, they're actually interacting with the web page.
I did this just for the purposes of this presentation because I knew that it would be technically difficult to have like the links and to go out of the presentation. But yes, I do the same thing though with French stores or Italian stores, that I send them to store websites and I send them to shopping for something with different instructions depending on the level, depending on the topic we're discussing. Grocery shopping is always easy and interesting, and is so great for cultural comparisons. You can do that in a first year semester class. Also, another thing that's appropriate and fun and so culturally rich in lower level classes is clothes shopping, that you give them an event or a set of events to shop for. What I usually do with college students is say that they're studying abroad, in my case in France or Italy, that the airline lost their suitcase and has no idea when they'll get it. So they have to go shopping for clothes for school, for going out, for staying at home, and for their internship, to give them different occasions that they have to shop for. So that's a real fun task for me. It could be just that I love clothes and shopping for clothes, but even if you don't, it's at least a useful task. So shopping tasks are fantastic, especially if you can use real websites that the students are directly interacting with, and they're appropriate, in my opinion, in every level. Any other good strategies come up?
Oh, I just want to mention that the task that you just mentioned, actually, I really like it because
Great.
actually you are maximum for the students with different scenario, and so they have to use the vocabulary with they learn with different kinds of situations and
Oh
to make
yeah.
sure. Yeah, yes, I really like that ideas.
You make sure they're understanding it and thinking about it rather than just regurgitating it when you give
Yes.
them scenarios. Another way you could slightly modify that task would be, instead of shopping for occasions, have them shop for different weather. Like, reframe the task: you're studying abroad for a whole year. Again, the airline lost your suitcase, and you need to get clothes for school and possibly other occasions for all 4 seasons and all kinds of weather that you would have in your study abroad location. So they're going to have to look at authentic materials that show the typical weather. And then they're going to have to look at the shopping website and get stuff that is appropriate for that weather and for the occasions that they expect.
Thank
Shopping
you for
tasks are
sharing.
great and so easy to design. So easy
Yeah.
to design too, usually.
Yeah, I love that idea.
I like easy tasks, especially, or well, easy for me to design with authentic materials that are easy to find, that are easy for students to use, like shopping. But honestly, all of the categories of authentic materials that I gave you today are very easy to find. Infographics are so easy to find. Just go to Google Images, type in your target language, infographic topic, and a target country, if your language is spoken in more than one country, and you're going to find it so easily. So easily. It took me a minute or two to find these infographics, literally. Nice. Do we have any other good strategies that came up? I know those strategies are hard to top. So basically, to sum it up, it's not guaranteed, but we help students and teachers stay in the target language by providing quality input that they can understand. I'm not using that word comprehensible input since I'm not in that method. And if we provide level appropriate, interesting tasks that are well scaffolded, that use the vocabulary and the structures that students have seen in the input, this helps students and teachers stay in the language. I better do a screen share again because I have a couple more things to show you in the last 10 minutes or so. This is less interesting, in my opinion, but I don't think it's less useful. So we talked about activities, but there's also some other things that, in my experience, will help keep your students in the target language. Let me make this larger because, at least on my screen, this is very hard to see. So I give my students something I call learning habits grades. I do this in every language, and I do this in every level of undergrad teaching. And I use the name learning habits instead of participation because, while it includes how much you volunteer in class, that's not all it includes. It includes if you come to class, if you come on time. It includes if when you're in class, you make a concerted level appropriate use to use the target language, that's why I highlighted in yellow, and consistently stay on task. It also takes into account whether you're prepared, whether you did your homework, whether you studied, whether you brought the materials that you needed to use. And lastly, it includes what people would probably call participation, the quality and the quantity of students saying stuff, volunteering in class. And even though it said A1 French, first semester French, there's nothing about this that's specific to French or to the A1 level. You could copy and paste this rubric, in my opinion, in any language, in any level of language class. You just have in your head slightly different expectations for what the target language use looks like. But in my opinion, all of this still applies. And did I indicate the percent of their grade this is? Yes, 25% of their grade with a grade assigned every week. So it's gonna hurt if a student shows poor learning habits. For the purposes of today's session, if the student is off task or doesn't make a level appropriate use of the target language, it is going to hurt. So, will students care? Generally, you'll have a few who won't care, who just don't care about school or don't care about your class, but this will definitely, I shouldn't say definitely, almost definitely, most likely get some of the kids who aren't making a good effort at using the target language to do a little bit better. Because even if world language isn't their priority class, they do care about their GPA, and they do care about having a poopy grade in world language that pulls down their GPA and maybe hurts their college application or their scholarship application. So this should help. Also, I'm not a big policy person. I don't like rules in general in most parts of life, but I also have a target language policy for my students. This is, again, from first year, first semester French. I would only adapt the first 2 sentences or so if I were teaching a different level. This is very applicable to all languages and levels. Basically, what it says in a nutshell is, I expect you to use the target language as much as possible in most situations, but we can, if necessary, use other languages in these situations. Talking about grammar, talking about vocabulary, like going back to the things that you can't translate, that you can't define, you can't illustrate, you can't act out, words like is and but, those kind of things we might have to translate to English or another language. Also, instructions. I generally don't recommend giving instructions in a language other than the target language. But at the same time, I don't see much harm if the students really aren't getting it, or if the task is level appropriate, but the instructions are complicated, to clarifying in a language that the students speak better than the target language if necessary. Also discussing course policies like this, and discussing classroom pedagogical approach. What do I mean by that? Like what we talked about at the beginning, reminding the students why we're doing things as we are, why we're using the target language, why we're grading learning habits. At least in a lower level class, this should probably be done in a language the students speak fluently. In an intermediate level class, read the room, go with their mood, your mood, try the target language, be okay resorting to something else if necessary. In advanced level classes, you can probably do most of this in the target language. Likewise, learning strategies goes with it. Talk about culture. I prefer to do that in the target language, but sometimes there's situations where the target language creates ambiguity, like words that are used in multiple ways that you honestly have to, without really beating around the bush or getting incomprehensible, resort to another language. And also, dare I say, I called it interpersonal relations, as this research article did, but this is behavior, like when students aren't doing what they're supposed to. If it's real simple that you can tell them, sit down, be quiet, something like that in the target language, do it. But if it requires more explanation, and if it's not something you can easily do in the target language, yeah, English or another language that the students and you speak better than the target language is absolutely justified. So, to sum this up, what are the main points of this session, at least in my opinion? Learners need input because it's where they get their language examples from. Learners need to produce output because they need to practice speaking or writing in order to be able to speak and write. When you provide input, it doesn't have to be comprehensible in the sense of the comprehensible input method that, again, I don't subscribe to because it doesn't provide examples of real language, but the input has to be comprehended. The students have to understand it, or else it's not going to help anyone. And ideally, your input would be through authentic materials, potentially including ads, shopping sites, posters, announcements, infographics. The sky is the limit. By authentic materials, I mean materials made by and for fluent speakers. Generally, consistent target language use means more input. Might have said generally, that's pretty much always. The more target language use, the more input they get. Also, the more comprehended input, the better. If students don't understand, they will fall asleep, they will act out, they won't do what you want them to. And also, we need to provide meaningful and level appropriate task, proficiency appropriate task that are communicative, that are proficiency driven to go with our meaningful input. And we need to scaffold them or support them appropriately. Does this make sense? So I think we have a little bit of time for questions, and I can stay at least a couple minutes later if you still have burning questions. But here's also on this last slide my contact information if you prefer to contact me that way for your question, or if you just prefer, or if you just want to have it for future use. Thank you for putting up with me on a Saturday morning. I know not everyone wants to do work things on Saturday mornings. What questions do you happen to have? Let me get out of the screen share so that I can actually see people asking questions.
Thank you. I appreciate the session. Thank you, CJ.
Thank you.
Oh, can you share your the learning habit grid?
Yes. Let me see if I can copy the image. Otherwise, what's probably going to be more useful is that I upload a syllabus with it in to the chat.
Okay, whatever works for you.
It won't let me because of your system's restrictions to upload anything to the chat.
Okay. Can you send it to me as in an email? So if anybody need it, I can share.
Sure. Don't let me forget because I'm forgetful.
Thank you.
There's no extra charge for that. Feel free to use it as you want. The target language policy will be in that same syllabus.
Thank you.
Any questions, comments, snide remarks? It was either that boring or that good. There have to be questions, comments, snide remarks.
I imagine that no matter how hard you try, you don't reach everyone. I
Of
mean,
course not.
okay, I just.
But do you reach more by providing good quality input, interesting activities than you do by doing the opposite? Of course you do.
Yeah. I was just curious if you, I don't know. I know you have a good sense of humor, and I
Some days.
find that, that might be more appealing for a lot of students in your classes. I don't have that. I unfortunately don't have a sense of humor, so.
Everyone
I
has
have
a
other
sense of
tricks
humor.
up my sleeve, so to say, but there's no way I'd lie if I'd say, oh, everyone is always focused and engaged, because that doesn't happen. As much as I would like to say that,
I don't think
it's
that anyone.
a good.
Sorry?
No, a lot more. There's always that one or two. I have one difficult class this year, which I would say there's two of them in particular, and they're just like, they're And they're overextended. I think students nowadays are very overextended, and if they're just there because they have to be, then it influences a lot on what they're doing. But
Absolutely. So that is a different topic that I don't know if I've presented in this series, but it's definitely worth presenting. How to make students think language is useful. Like, and obviously it's not going to reach all of them, but different strategies, there's many, for showing students why and how language could be useful and why, as a result, they should actually kind of sort of low-key care in language class.
well, there goes. Put that on the list.
Maybe that should be my next one. Strategies to make students care, to make students think language class is useful.
Yes. Then you have a topic for our next series.
I haven't
our fall
presented that,
series.
have I?
Yeah.
And no
of
one else
course.
has?
Any other topics? And then we can put CJ on our 2026 spring series as well.
Sure, if you have a second one.
Thank you.
Any questions, comments, snide remarks?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here and participating so actively.
Thank you. I appreciate you. I mean, CJ, you came to present on a Saturday morning. Everybody else participating in Saturday morning. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
My pleasure. I'm here to learn new teaching strategies and to hopefully give people stuff to think about and maybe a couple laughs in the process.
I always enjoy your session. You have a great sense of humor. It's not like me. I mean, I cannot be very humorous, but I'm learning from you. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear it. Likewise, I can't be
Smile is
very serious.
contagious. Your smile is contagious.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
You gave me another idea of a session idea, though. It's a very unfully formed idea. Something about using humor in class.
Yeah. So we have a topic for 2026.
We do. And you
Good
know what?
topic.
In upper level classes, like say from at least B2 level up, you can use like actual comedy from YouTube, from Insta, from TikTok in class. And not only will you make your kids laugh through authentic materials, but that stuff is so culturally rich of what's funny in different cultures, of the cultural references that are in there, the hidden meanings. Humor is fantastic if your students have a sufficient level to understand it. And even in lower level classes, they can understand what do you call these in English, like comic strips and memes. They can understand well-chosen things like that in basic level classes. Huh.
If
So
you
maybe
are presenting that to MO years, I still struggle to understand American humors
me
sometimes.
too.
Yeah. Okay. It seems we don't have any questions. Thank you very much. And let's call it a day. Thank you for
Okay.
participation.
And I will
and
send you
thanks
right
for-
now the
everybody.
syllabus. Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Have a nice weekend. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, CJ.
Bye.
Thank you, CJ. Thank
My
you, Gwen.
pleasure.